There's a moment that doesn't look dramatic, but changes everything. You stop waiting, not because you gave up, not because you stopped caring, but because something inside you finally understood. They are not going to show up differently. For a long time, you held on to a quiet hope. Maybe they'll realize. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they'll meet me where I am. Maybe if I'm patient enough, understanding enough, consistent enough, something will shift. So you waited. You gave chances. You explained your needs. You tried to create space for growth because you believed in what the connection could become. But slowly, something became impossible to ignore. Their effort wasn't evolving. Their presence wasn't deepening. Their behavior wasn't changing. And the hardest part wasn't what they were doing. It was what you kept hoping they would do instead. Because hope can keep you emotionally attached to something long after reality has shown you the truth. And then one day, without a big conversation, without a final moment, without closure, you just saw it clearly. This is who they are right now. And I've been waiting for a version of them that isn't showing up. That realization isn't loud. It's quiet. But it's final. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And something inside you begins to shift. Not toward anger, not toward resentment, but toward acceptance. Waiting doesn't feel harmful at first. It feels patient. It feels understanding. It feels like love. You tell yourself, people need time. People grow differently. Not everyone expresses themselves the same way. So you stay open. You give space. You hold on to the belief that what you're seeing now is just a phase, that something deeper will eventually emerge. And in the beginning, that hope can feel beautiful. It keeps the connection alive. It softens disappointment. It allows you to see beyond what's missing and focus on what's possible. But over time, waiting begins to change form. It stops feeling like patience and starts feeling like suspension. You're no longer fully present in the relationship. You're emotionally living in the future, in a version of them that hasn't shown up yet. You start measuring moments against what could be instead of what is. You tell yourself, this conversation was better. Maybe they're trying. They showed effort today. Maybe things are shifting. They were distant again, but they've been stressed. And slowly, your connection to reality becomes filtered through expectation. You're not relating to who they consistently are. You're relating to the version of them you're waiting for. And that creates a quiet disconnection inside you. Because while you're focused on their potential, you begin ignoring your own experience. You overlook how you actually feel, the inconsistency, the emotional gaps, the moments where you don't feel chosen or met. You downplay those feelings because they don't match the future you're holding on to. So instead of responding to what's happening now, you tolerate it. You adapt to it. You make space for it. And every time you do, you move a little further away from yourself. Your needs become negotiable. Your standards become flexible. Your boundaries become softer than they should be. Not because you don't value them, but because you're hoping the situation will eventually align with them. But here's the truth that slowly begins to surface. Waiting does not create change. It delays decisions. It keeps you emotionally invested without requiring the other person to meet you fully. And the longer you stay in that space, the more you normalize a connection that doesn't actually fulfill you. You get used to the gaps. You get used to the inconsistency. You get used to not being met in the ways you need. And that normalization is where the real cost of waiting shows up, because it doesn't just affect The relationship, it affects how you relate to yourself. You begin questioning your own expectations. Am I asking for too much? Am I being too sensitive? Should I just accept what they can give? Those questions don't come from clarity. They come from staying in something that requires you to ignore your own truth. And eventually, something inside you gets tired, not of them, of waiting, of holding on to a version of reality that never fully arrives, of adjusting yourself around a hope that keeps getting postponed. That's when the shift begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly, you start seeing the difference between patience and self-abandonment. And once you see that difference, you can't unknow it. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It's not a sudden decision. It's a slow realization that builds quietly. Over time, you start noticing how often you're the one holding the connection together, how often you're the one giving it meaning, how often you're the one keeping hope alive, and something inside you begins asking a different question. Not, will they change? But, why am I still waiting? That question changes everything because it brings your focus back to you, back to your experience, back to your reality. You start seeing the pattern more clearly. The inconsistency isn't occasional, it's consistent. The effort isn't growing, it's repeating. The connection isn't evolving, it's staying exactly where it's always been. And for the first time, you stop interpreting it as a phase. You start recognizing it as a choice, their choice, not to show up differently, not to meet you fully, not to grow in the way you've been hoping. And that realization can feel heavy at first because it removes the illusion that things are about to change. But underneath that heaviness, something else begins to rise. Clarity. Clean, undeniable clarity. You realize you've been waiting for a version of them that they are not choosing to become. And once you see that, waiting no longer feels like love. It feels like delay. Delay of your peace. Delay of your standards. Delay of your life. Moving forward. That's the moment your energy begins to shift. You stop investing in what might happen. You start responding to what is happening right now, not tomorrow, not someday, now. And when you bring yourself fully into the present, your decisions become clearer because the present doesn't need interpretation. It shows you everything as it is. If someone is consistent, you feel it. If someone is distant, you feel that too. If someone is showing up, you don't have to question it. And if they're not, you no longer explain it away. You simply see it. That's when waiting loses its hold on you. Not because you forced yourself to stop caring, but because reality became more important than hope. You begin making decisions that reflect your truth, not your expectations. You stop giving unlimited time to someone who isn't meeting you. You stop shrinking your needs to keep the connection alive. You stop holding space for potential that isn't being acted on. Instead, you hold space for yourself, your clarity, your standards, your emotional well-being. And that shift is incredibly powerful because it marks the moment. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing, choosing what stays, choosing what leaves, choosing what aligns with your life now, not someday, now. And once you step into that position, everything changes because you're no longer passively hoping for a different outcome. You're actively responding to the truth in front of you. Letting go of them isn't the hardest part. Letting go of who you believe they could be is, because the attachment was never just to the person, it was to the possibility, the version of the relationship that almost existed, the version of them that showed up in moments, but never stayed. Those glimpses are what made it hard. The good conversations, the rare effort, the times they felt present enough that you thought, this is it. This is who they really are. So you held on to those moments. You built meaning around them. You used them as evidence that something deeper was possible. And every time they pulled away again, you didn't just feel disappointment. You felt confusion because you had seen what they could be, but what you were experiencing consistently didn't match that version. So you stayed in between reality and potential, between what was happening and what you hoped would eventually happen. And that in between space is one of the most emotionally exhausting places to live because it keeps you attached without ever feeling secure. It keeps you hopeful without ever feeling fulfilled. It keeps you invested without ever feeling chosen. And eventually, you begin to see something clearly. Potential is not the same as presence. Someone can show you who they could be and still choose not to be that person consistently. And consistency is what creates real connection, not occasional effort, not temporary alignment. Consistency, once that truth fully lands, something inside you starts letting go, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of honesty. You stop holding on to those rare moments as proof of what the relationship could become. You start seeing them for what they actually were, moments, not patterns. And that distinction changes everything because patterns are what build relationships, not moments, not promises, not potential, patterns. And when you shift your focus to patterns, the truth becomes undeniable. You are not being met in the way you need. You are not being chosen consistently. You are not experiencing the kind of presence that allows a relationship to grow. And once you see that, holding on no longer feels loving. It feels like resisting reality. That's when the release happens. Quietly, internally, you stop replaying what it could have been. You stop imagining what might change. You stop investing emotionally in a future that has no real foundation. In the present, and in that release, something unexpected appears. Peace, not because it didn't matter, but because you're no longer torn between truth and hope. You've chosen truth, and truth, while sometimes painful, is always grounding. It brings you back to yourself, back to what you feel, back to what you need, back to what you deserve, without having to question it. And that's when your energy fully returns, no longer tied to what could have been, no longer invested in waiting, no longer stretched between reality and imagination. Just here, present, clear, and ready to choose something real. The final realization doesn't arrive loudly. It lands quietly. But once it does, everything changes. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person for a long time. That question followed you. Am I expecting too much? Am I being unrealistic? Should I just accept what they can give? Because when someone consistently fails to meet your needs, it's easy to turn inward and question yourself, to believe that maybe your standards are the problem, that maybe your desire for consistency, for presence, for emotional depth is somehow too much. But now you see it differently. The problem was never your needs. It was where you were placing them. You were asking for consistency from someone who was comfortable being inconsistent. You were asking for presence from someone who showed up when it suited them. You were asking for growth from someone who wasn't choosing it. And no amount of patience, no amount of understanding, no amount of waiting can create alignment where it doesn't exist. That realization can feel heavy for a moment because it closes the door on what you hoped the connection could become. But right behind that heaviness is something freeing. Clarity. Clean, grounded clarity. You stop negotiating with your own needs. You stop shrinking them to fit someone else's limitations. You stop convincing yourself that less is enough when you know it isn't. Instead, you begin honoring what you've always known. You need consistency. You need effort. You need emotional presence. And those needs are not excessive. They are foundational. And once you fully accept that, you stop returning to situations that cannot meet you there. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. Because you understand now that staying does not create change. It creates delay. Delay of the kind of connection you're actually looking for. Delay of the peace you could already be living in. And once you stop waiting, your life begins moving again. Not rushed, not forced, but aligned. You make space for people who show up consistently. You make space for connections that don't require explanation to feel real. You make space for relationships where you are met without having to ask twice. And most importantly, you make space for yourself, your clarity, your standards, your emotional truth. And in that space, you realize something that once felt out of reach. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer hoping someone will become what you need. You're choosing what already aligns with you. And that shift is where everything begins to feel different, calmer, clearer, more certain, because you're no longer holding on to potential. You're living in reality. If this message resonated with you, then you may already be in that moment, the moment you stopped waiting and started seeing clearly. And if you're there, stay with us at Depth of Us, because this space is for women who are no longer waiting to be met, but choosing what already meets them fully, consistently, and without confusion.